Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I know it's pretty late and some people have been yawning. I know I had some coffee some time ago, so if you need to grab a quick cup of tea, now's probably a good time to grab it. I just want to give a little bit of a shout out to you all for hanging in there for the last 2 weeks. I know I had the internet go out with AT&T and feuding with them, and then we had a lot of folks out for Midwest streaming last week, which I saw many pictures of, and it looked really, really fun. And I'm so sorry that I missed you all when you were here in Chicago. So for tonight, this is our actual first week of combing through the content for the Platform Developer 1. We already got our feet wet with the logistics of the study group using Slack, staying in touch, going through the weekly content sheet so that we can continue on our learnings in between weeks. And now we're going to take a dive into the content. And this week is actually a little bit easier because it's more on the Salesforce fundamental side. So before we get started for tonight, I just want to say that I have been watching all the questions come in on the Slack channel and via Twitter, and I want to tell you that I understand the feeling all too well. Sometimes when you're getting started with something new, it can get overwhelming pretty fast. So for tonight, I want to actually kick off with a little humor. And one of my coaches, Leslie, from when I took the Red Women Code course, shared with us a whole bunch of memes that she had gathered from other people in the Ohana, sharing them throughout their presentations and so forth. And so this is actually one of them. So here you can see, and for those of you guys that are listening and not watching, it says 99 little bugs in the code. 99 little bugs. Take one down, patch it around. 127 little bugs in the code. So for those of you that have been working through the trailhead exercises with the Apex triggers and other of the assignments that we had, this may be reflective of how we feel sometimes. I know I do, and I've been, working in Apex for since mid-February of this year, and that's normal. So you just have to kind of become acclimated that debugging is sometimes a little tricky and sometimes very time-consuming. But in the end of the day, we do learn from it. And it gets a little bit easier as we go along. So hang on in there, everyone. So for weekly shout-outs, I want to thank Brooke for updating our weekly content schedules with our Trailhead modules. Mark has been an awesome social media ambassador, and he's been on Slack 24/7 helping us out. So thank you so much, Mark, for all your help. I did notice that Jen, Matt, and Kelsey have been adding flashcards to our Google Sheets resource. So thank you for adding those in. And for those of you that haven't as of yet, no worries. There isn't like a set amount that you have to put in there every week. But we do want this document to grow as we move along because it'll be helpful for us to read through things, adding to them, get a little bit better understanding, and get our feet wet with taking questions. And Kelly, thank you for volunteering to present. Woohoo! You and I will touch base to figure out which week, but thank you for volunteering. So far, we have 33 of us that have shared our Twitter handle, and I know that Mark has created us a group in Twitter, a Twitter list, so that we can stay in touch on there. Believe it or not, we've had over 115 clicks to our PD1 premix trail mix. And that means that out of there's just over 100 of us right now. We've been actually trying to get some work done in understanding some of these concepts. So thank you all for putting in the time and efforts there. And our Slack workspace is getting some more volume. So we've had 143 clicks to our link for people to get engaged on Slack. If you're not on Slack already, please join, because a 2-hour session once a week is definitely not enough. And that's the one place that we can all stay in touch throughout the week, answer questions, share ideas and resources, and so forth. And to everybody who's been sharing their experience on any social media outlets and with anybody that you know, thank you so much, and keep it going, because this is just one pilot. And I know that Ladies Be Architects is looking at ways that they can pilot more study groups. And Mark shared this image on Twitter a few weeks ago. And I thought that it was really good for week 0 reflection. So week 0 was actually our kickoff, right? And anything that happened up until today's date. And I really like this because it says, give strength to that voice within, saying, yes, you can, and find a way to make it happen. And the reason why I wanted to share this with you again is because, 1, not everyone's on Twitter, but also 2, because it takes a lot to study when life is already so busy. We have work, we have families, we have all different things going on, and it takes a lot to just carve out a little bit of time every day to study and carve out some more time to be on the weekly sessions. And you know what? We will find a way as a group to make it happen and to keep each other motivated and moving forward. And so one of the quotes that I want to share, and it's actually from Leslie, who was my coach with Rad Women Code. She said this, and it really stayed with me. She said, just show up. And the story behind that, she actually explained how she showed up to an event that her friend dragged her to. And long story short, it ended up turning into her getting involved in Salesforce and becoming engaged in the ecosystem and developing a career around Salesforce, becoming a Rad Women coach. And we just have to show up. We may not feel good. We may be a little insecure about the content, but we will just show up and we will work things out together. And with that, I actually want to transition to our guest speaker, who is our very, very own Mark, who is going to talk a little bit about his experience in taking the Platform Developer 1 beta exam at Midwest Streaming. Mark, thank you so much.
Okay, can everyone hear me okay?
I can hear you.
Okay. So I was going to send Blanca some stuff today to put on this slide, and I found out today I was being let go from my current role. So it was a busy day for me, but yeah, I specialize in kind of the nonprofit space and Salesforce consulting and user group leader, and I had the great fortune to present at Midwest Streaming on using personas as a user experience tool to help plan out Salesforce security. And it was a great experience, but also while I was at Midwest Streaming, there is a form that's out there for people who are interested in being subject matter experts for the Trailhead team, and we can share that link in the Slack again. It's been there a couple times, but the subject matter experts are where they tap into the community and ask for, help with beta exams. And beta exams are different than your regular exams. So last week I took the Platform Developer 1 exam while I was at Midwest Streaming. It wasn't specifically tied to Midwest Streaming, but was just because I had to do it by last Friday, and well, I was in Chicago. The Platform Developer beta exam, the beta exams are a little bit different. They have 90 questions only 60 of them count, and you don't know which 60 of them until after they finish the exam, which doesn't happen right away. So I don't know how I did, but I wanted to take an opportunity to share some of the things that I learned from taking that exam, because there were some insights that I got from taking that exam. And I was not super ready. I've done some development work. I've done some stuff here. I've done a lot of Trailhead, but I haven't actually really focused on preparing for that exam. And so one of the things that really stood out to me is there are a lot of pieces that are familiar if you're an admin or if you've done platform app builder. There are lots of questions that relate to data model. There's questions that touch on, this is a junction object, and how do I need to do this? Do I need to build an object that's between this, and it has a master detail relationship to two different objects? So there's definitely questions that are familiar without even getting into code, without touching code. And then there's, for a lot of you, you may be familiar with those order of execution that happens up under the Salesforce exams, and Platform App Builder really like that topic. Advanced Admin, if any of you have taken it, does too. And one of the things is that's actually a lot of the questions. Now, there's a little bit of a bent now to whether this is a before trigger or an after trigger, but a lot of it is understanding the platform and the pieces and putting it together. And it doesn't touch anything on code whatsoever. There is a strong element that is really about understanding the platform. And so think of this as the equivalent of the admin exam. It doesn't mean you know everything about programming. In fact, it assumes you don't know everything about programming. It means you understand the platform and you understand the technologies that you're working with. And there's even a question on there that related to flow, and questions on there that relate to all sorts of things. There was even one where the answer was record types and page layouts. So there is some familiar territory. So first, don't get too worried about the code and understanding the code, because you're not going to have to write code. You're not going to have to write code. Repeat this again because it's scary when it's a developer exam. You don't have to write code. But what they're trying to do is, do you understand the implications of stuff that's in the code or what's happening in the code? And to that extent, there is some stuff related to Apex, and it's a trigger. And is it a before trigger or an after trigger? They will ask questions that relate to error handling. So what happens when you do this? What happens when you do that? You'll get a block of code and it's like, well, it's going to try this. And then there's a whole bunch of catch statements for different types of errors. And you have to look at that code and go, okay, well, what's wrong with this and what's going to happen? The great thing for most of us, and for me, like my experience as a developer, I learned all the wrong ways to write code. Like I learned every kind of error message possible when I was first starting because I wrote it wrong. And then I'm trying to debug it. I'm going, okay, this doesn't work. Why doesn't this work? And you eventually track it down. Well, that is actual excellent practice, because you're going to be looking at code and trying to figure out, is this just not going to work because they left a semicolon off there? Is this going to give an error because it's this? And then there is some stuff that gets more into core code, and that's usually the Visualforce constructors. There are a lot of questions on Visualforce and the controllers, but I don't know if that's a relevant thing. But Costa, the programming is all learning by making mistakes. Everything you learn as a programmer is probably from doing it wrong the first time and then doing it so that it works and finding out 3 months later that it was really wrong still, just happened to work. But there was a good bit on Visualforce and controllers, and that's where I'm not certain, because your normal platform developer one has 60 questions and the betas all have 90. And 30 of those questions they're going to take off the exam and they won't be counted on the final, which is why I don't know what my score is until they have looked through all the exams that were taken. But there is a good bit of Visualforce on the exam. There's a good bit of Apex. There's not a lot of Lightning. What you really want to know on Lightning is to understand what the individual pieces that make up a Lightning component bundle are and what they do, because that's where most of the questions on Lightning go. You won't have questions on JavaScript. You won't have questions on attributes or a lot of code. There's a little bit on using the SLDS styling. There is some stuff on Heroku, but there was only like one question on Heroku on the beta exam that I took. So there seem to have been more Heroku questions on the others. And Heroku is flat up, it's not really Salesforce. It's not Salesforce. It's really a different platform for running applications, and they did some of the work to connect it to Salesforce. So if you're finding Apex a little bit more intelligible and Heroku to be kind of completely different, you're not alone, because Heroku is a completely different platform for running apps. It's not the normal thing with Apex and Visualforce and even Lightning Experience. It's kind of they take some of the work out of connecting to Salesforce so you can make your own apps, but you can build Heroku apps that have nothing to do with Salesforce. So, but that was kind of the experience that I had. A lot of questions. I think really your first thing is really just make sure you're understanding those Salesforce fundamentals. And anyone have any questions for me about this before we jump into going back to Blanca, and if anyone else is sharing tonight with the content?
Hey, Mark, thanks for sharing. I do have a question. You mentioned an acronym that I didn't catch. It's something styling, SBS styling? Or
the SLDS.
What?
The Salesforce Lightning Design System.
Oh, okay. That's for the component. They have a whole dictionary about that, right?
Yes, there is a website called Lightning Design System, and when you get to Lightning components, it is your absolute amazing best friend. The SLDS, or Salads as some developers call it, or the Lightning Design System, is all about how Lightning components are styled, and all about the stuff that Salesforce gives you to do styling, so that you don't have to write cascading style sheet stuff yourself to build apps. And so when you look at a Lightning component that was written by a developer, if they're a good Lightning developer, they've used all stuff from the SLDS, and they're not writing their own CSS for the most part. They're really just building this and using these particular styles that Salesforce has. And so they have what they call toast styles. And if you don't know what a toast is, that's a message, a little banner that would go across the top that say you succeeded, or you failed, or there was an error, or there was a warning, or something like that. It's called a toast. And if you look at Lightning Design System, there's actually a whole little section there that's all about toasts. And they have this toast style, which is called SLDS- tech style, or something like that, -success. And when you apply that, that does things like give it a green background, white text, and other things like that to say that it was a successful action.
Mark, it looks like we have some questions coming in. Some of them include, how does one get on the beta exam? And I know you mentioned the SME program.
Right. So there is the SME, the Subject Matter Expert program with Salesforce, and they've moved this to a new person up under Trailhead. They are really trying to leverage this program, and sorry, I saw a little message further down, but
I'm hungry too.
So the SME program, what they're trying to do is they're looking for some expertise from the community on this, and they include things like the beta exam and other stuff like that. But when I filled out my SME form, I reached out to them and said, hey, I would love to participate in this beta because I know you have it open. And they're like, hey, yeah, we'd love to get your perspective and figure this. So let me see if I can find the link, and I will share this. It is a form that you fill out. And all right, where is it? And you can specify what you want to do. So is it helping with training, helping with Trailhead modules, that sort of thing. And you can also specify that you want to join in on the beta exams.
And then it looks like Olivia had a question. She's wondering, first of all, she says she's so glad to have you part of the group. And then she's wondering, how long have you been working on the programmatic side and studying for the exam?
Since the end of March.
Great. And so since the end of March is not very long ago. So everyone, we're all just getting our feet wet. And for anyone, I know that some folks had questions and felt a little bit overwhelmed. Hang in there.
Yep.
Don't get discouraged. Don't think that you cannot learn it. It is a learning curve, and I promise you, we will learn together. Whether we all pass it or not on the very first try, whenever it is that we as individuals decide to take the exam, you know what? It's a lesson learned. If we pass it, then great. Move on to the next step, whatever that may be for you. If we don't pass it, great. Then we know which areas we need to focus on to study a little bit more so that we can attempt it again and then pass it. So please, please just hang in tight with us. Keep lines of communications open. Do not be bashful in asking questions in the Slack channel. If you want, feel free to email questions directly to me. One of my goals is to check in with you guys shortly before our Thursday night session to see if there's any questions you want to submit to me. And then I can do my best to gather answers and resources and then share them during our call. And so that way you remain anonymous. But I do think that asking questions is the only way that we will learn. So please do not be hesitant. Just dive right in, and there's no stupid question. And some people did say they didn't get any questions on the exam about Heroku. Today we're going to talk a little bit about that. It's actually one of the last objectives. Before we move on with content, does anyone have any last questions for Mark in relation to the beta exam? Okay, well, thank you, Mark, for sharing that with us.
And feel free to ping me in the Slack channel or on Twitter if you have other questions that you think of later.
Sounds great. So let's move on. Here we have the objectives for this week, right? So this is not diving into Visualforce. This is not diving into Apex coding. This week, what we're primarily focusing on is those Salesforce fundamentals that Mark mentioned. We are looking at what considerations do we need to have for developing in a multi-tenant environment. What does that even mean? Describe how the Salesforce platform features the MVC pattern, and I will explain that in a second. It's coming up on the next slide. Describe the capabilities of the core CRM objects and in the Salesforce schema. Identify common scenarios on how to use the AppExchange and its capabilities. And then we go into a little bit about common use cases for declarative customization, Lightning platform, and customization for Roku platform. So let's talk a little bit about the Salesforce fundamentals. Specifically, what does a multi-tenant environment mean? And why do we need to be mindful of it? So one of the main things is that Salesforce is cloud-based, right? Everyone is sharing the same space on servers and is sharing the same code base. So for every customer that has an org, it's in a communal type area, right? So here is a picture of an apartment building. And one of the great analogies, and this was also explained to us during the Red Women Code, is this little window up here, that's our, as an individual, little space. As part of the whole CRM servers and everything in the cloud with Salesforce. And so because we have just this one little dedicated apartment in this building, we have to share resources, right? We have to share power, water, and everything else that goes along with living in an apartment building. And so one of the things that's really important as it applies to developing is that if you haven't heard this term already, and I'm going a little bit out of order from this slide deck, but if you haven't heard this term already, you're going to become familiar with it. There are governor limits, right? So governor limits are there to help all of us who have orgs be mindful of the shared resources, right? We don't want one organization running and querying all data from their instance, and then it takes up a lot of resources and it hinders other orgs from doing what they need to do. So Salesforce just flat out doesn't allow for this kind of conflict to happen, right? They automatically put in governor limits to help ensure that everyone has equal resources, everyone is up and working, and no one is bogging down another work. So that's one of the big concepts. Salesforce does a lot of work and they push out updates 3 times a year, right? So they're maintaining the CRM. They are taking care of the updates on their end and making sure that we are getting most up-to-date service and value out of the product. So there are automatic upgrades for everyone along with that. Again, all customers share the same code base. So when you first sign up and you get a Salesforce org, you're on the same code. If Mark started one last month and I start one today, we're all sharing the base code is the same. Customizations are specified as metadata. So can you type in the chat box yes if you have heard the term metadata before? Yeah, we got a good yes. Okay, so there's a lot of things going on, especially people talking about custom metadata types. So metadata is actually data about your data, right? So it may sound confusing, but I also heard the term when people were referring to custom metadata as a taco. So think of it as having a taco and the taco is holding all the information inside. So metadata is data about your data. And then another very important, extremely crucial thing to be mindful of when it comes to developing for the Salesforce platform is that we must have at least 75% test coverage in order for us to deploy that code, right? If we don't have 75% or above, we cannot push our code through, right? So do we want to strive for 75? No, you should never settle for that. You should always strive for 100, but sometimes things happen and you have a little bit of wiggle room, and 75 is basically the point where you have to meet in order for it to go through. Test coverage mean? Yeah, so this is great. Andy asked, what does test coverage mean? So basically, whenever you are coding for Salesforce, you have to create what's called test classes, right? So you create more code that's testing the code that you developed to make sure that it's working properly, that you don't have all of these errors and it's not causing conflict. Does that make sense, Andy and Jennifer? It's basically meaning if I write code and I want to push it through to deployment, if I have not developed test classes, which is another set of code, to make sure that I'm checking for failure points within the code that I develop. If it fails, you get a percentage of where you fall short from the 100. And if you don't have at least 75 and above, you can't push that code through. Yeah.
Can I try to explain it in an example?
Yeah, sure, Kelly, go ahead.
So, for example, if you're doing declarative programming or declarative things on Salesforce, for example, if you were to create a workflow, say if a customer buys a product that is $1,000, they spend $1,000, you create a workflow that they get, I don't know, a free bag of chips if they buy $1,000 worth of product. That's a okay. So when you write that in Apex, so how do you test it when you do that? So when you write that on a workflow declaratively, you have to go in and test the data, right? You have to actually go in. Okay, I'm going to create an account, and this person's going to buy $1,000, and you have to put the amount in and everything, and then you would test it on Salesforce. And if it runs, then if you put at the back end, I'll get a notification or whatever, then that works. But if you write it programmatically, the same thing, but not using a workflow, if you write it programmatically in Apex, then you have to do the same thing. You have to write, okay, if amount on account is 1,000, then free bag of chips, right? But then you actually have to, the test class is when you actually put the data in. Okay, account, this account spent $1,000, and this account spent $50, and this account, and then you have to test that it actually ran in the background, in the program side. Does that make sense?
We got a few people said yeah.
So if you write code in the background, you have to write scenario code to make sure that those things that you touch passes. And that's what it means when you have to get at least 75%.
And the question that was posted in the chat is that it doesn't actually create the data; it just pretends to write the data.
Right. It's a test, like it is. You don't upload anything into it. You're just testing to make sure that that particular code that you wrote works and it didn't break anything else.
Mm-hmm. And so test classes, if this is new, there's a lot of resources on this. And in the resources at the end of today's slide deck, I've included some of this. So David Liu has Apex Academy courses on Pluralsight, and he is forever stressing that you have to have your test classes. If you talk to anyone who's in development on any level in Salesforce, it's like that is one step you cannot avoid. You cannot try to execute code without having test class for it. So yeah, we will be seeing some more of that as we move forward. And thank you, Kelly and Mark, for clarifying.
And just a quick note on the code coverage. So it's whether or not it has code that can cover all the different methods that get specified. So it's not whether it passes or fails, because sometimes the code is actually meant, a test class is meant to produce a result that fails. So it's not really a pass or fail type of scenario as much as it is, do you have something that tests a function that you have inside of your class? So if you have methods and you have these lines of codes, do you have something that tests to make sure that the results that you get when you run that code are what you would expect? And that becomes really, really important when you start doing like bulk operations like triggers. You may change one record, but if you have 200 other people who changed other records in the org, that trigger is handling all 200 at the same time. And so when you get into bulk code, you end up with scenarios where that can fail, and from a code perspective, that can be really challenging. But the other thing that the code coverage, a really important thing, is because they want to make sure other stuff doesn't break your code. So part of that code coverage, the reason for enforcing the code coverage is that when other code gets moved or someone else moves, it doesn't cause a problem with yours. And Salesforce, when they do a release, before they go to the general availability, does this thing called the hammer, which is a really cool process. But they basically run millions of test code scenarios against the new release over a process of a period of time to see if there's any problems in the platform before they go to then put it in a preview instance.
And I just made a note to share some additional resources on test coverage, and to make sure that I look out for ways to communicate more scenarios on that. Okay, and so next, one thing that we mentioned in the slide that we just transitioned from is MVC, right? So what in the world does MVC mean? It's the Model View Controller, and basically we need to be able to describe how Salesforce features and maps to the MVC pattern. So it's generally referred to as standard controllers, or even sometimes the standard controller. So here you may have seen similar diagrams to this. M stands for model. So when you think about model, it's what defines the structure of our data, right? So we have data objects, then there's database, Salesforce objects, and related elements. Then when you think about the V is view. So when we're thinking about this, it's what actually represents the presentation layer. So in view, we have the user interface. We have the browser page, mobile pages, page layouts, visual force pages. These are all things that represent the presentation. And then last we have C, which is controller. And that's containing our business logic. So the business logic, and we also have, we mentioned this standard controller, and it's also custom controller. We have Apex. And then here, I know some of you have mentioned Focus on Force in our Slack. It's a great resources for studying. This link here will actually take you to more information about MVC, and then this site here breaks down this diagram a little bit too. And then next we need to talk about the AppExchange. So I didn't load the video in here because of time, but when I share this presentation, it's actually in our Google Docs now too. You can click on this and go to the YouTube video, and it's a Salesforce video. It's like, I don't know, a minute and something long, and it just gives you a high-level overview of the AppExchange in case anybody wants to look at that. So the AppExchange, we need to be able to identify the common scenarios for extending an application's capabilities using the AppExchange. So what is the AppExchange? It's a marketplace, right? It's a marketplace for third-party custom add-ons. These apps are used to extend the functionality of Salesforce. There's solutions found on the AppExchange that provide out-of-the-box options. So if anyone has used any app, and there's many of them, some are free, some have subscriptions, but if anyone has used an app from the AppExchange, can you type in the name in the chat box? There are different apps. Some of them vary. They're related to marketing or reports. We have here Spring CM, Conga, Field Trip. Field Trip is awesome. Thanks, Yuan. Yeah, so any of the apps that you find on the AppExchange are basically just extending what you can do with Salesforce, right? Who develops these apps? Well, somebody mentioned Salesforce Labs. Yes, Salesforce Labs are Salesforce employees, right, who create those apps. And then other customers create apps, and partners can develop apps. And they all are in the marketplace, which is the AppExchange. And you can install app packages to Sandbox as well. And so let's talk a little bit about what you find on the AppExchange. So for apps, there's managed packages, there's unmanaged packages, there's native composite apps, there's industry and function specific apps. Another area is the lightning bolt solutions, which have community templates, industry of business use cases. There's lightning components, so add-ons for lightning pages, use for community. And then there's lightning data for sales, marketing, external data sets. So lightning is a huge thing, and I know not everybody is on lightning yet. But the way things are moving, at some point, everyone should be moving to lightning. But there's a lot of things that you can find that other people build. For instance, when I was doing the Be a Builder campaign that Trailhead had not long ago, they had the carousel, the slide carousel image that was going on. And that I found on the Lightning category in the AppExchange, and it was by Salesforce partners. I think it was Silverline CRM. And then also there's apps that you can find. For instance, at the nonprofit that I worked at previously, we were using the nonprofit starter pack, but then we also used Salsa Engage for our advocacy platform. We also used MailChimp for marketing. And so these are ways that you can extend functionality by using apps and Lightning components and other things that third parties have available on the marketplace. And again, some are free and some are not. And Mark says, yes, there really are questions about that. Yeah, so we're going to talk about scenarios as well. Okay. And so one of our next objectives is identifying use cases for declarative customizations on the Lightning platform. So there's Lightning Flow reduces the need for Apex code, right? People have probably heard the terminology clicks, not code, right? We try to do as much as possible as we can on the click side, doing declarative work, but every now and then we have to do code. And it's basically trying to figure out, well, first of all, let me take a step back and think about what it is that we need to do. And is it something that we can do with Process Builder? Is it something that we can do with workflow rules or flows? Sometimes we may hit some roadblocks, and you may need to use Apex code or Visualforce. And some of these cases will be surrounding scheduled jobs, complex reporting, email processing, automated record sharing. And Mark shared a scenario in the chat box. It was for the sales tax calculation, and answer options were build your own with various tools. Some made up OOTB functionality or use the AppExchange for select package. So let's talk a little bit about this. Can you share an example where we'd have to use declarative customizations, where we would use it? Feel free to unmute yourself or type in the chat box.
When you need to call a web service, sorry about the dog. You need to go outside of your org, for example, to get data from other places.
Mark has to update a field on a related record when the parent record changes. Anyone else? Adding new users to chatter groups. Okay. So here are just a few. Display the sum or count the number of related records, as well as display the average. And here are two that are kind of more, I like to think of a little bit preventative, right? Like you want to make sure that if something is entered into the system, there is rationale why it's being accepted and why it's being entered. So one of the examples we had in a previous exercise that I've done in the past was, well, how do we make use of a validation rule to make sure that you're not deleting an inventory item, but there's stock still available. Another one is ensuring the data is entered in the proper format, right? So whether it's a social security number or birthday or something like that, just want to make sure that things are being done when it makes sense. So like we don't want to delete inventory line item if we have X amount of stock in, right? No, we want to get rid of that stock. And then if we want to discontinue the inventory, then okay. All right, so let's move on here. Can you share some examples of when code may be required? Does anyone want to unmute themselves? Looks like Mark added before delete, before update. When you run out of roll-up summary fields, hit your limit.
So one of those order of execution things, and you see this on exam probably no matter which PD1, the second you see the word before, you know it has to be a trigger. It can't be anything other than a trigger when you see the word before something happens. Because the trigger is the only way to do it. Before an update, before insert, or before delete can only happen on triggers. You can't do them with any other tool at all, even just like a regular Apex class, unless you're calling it from a trigger.
Agreed with Alex on great hint. And everyone, if you come across any spell outs that help us remember or any other hints, feel free to share it in Slack or create a new document in our Google Drive. We can just keep track of these things on an ongoing basis. But thanks, Mark, on that. Okay, so let's look at what are some of the examples of when code may be required. So if the logic is very complex, business processes are not supported by workflow, you may need to code. To create web services, you have to code. Perform complex validation over multiple objects, you may have to code. Create transactional logic and attach custom logic to another operation. So again, they're higher level, more complex reasons, and we hit limits with all of the other tools that we can use, like Process Builder and Flow. Then we may have to think outside the box and then look at some of these. And then we had a lot of questions about Heroku. So what is Heroku, right? Mark explained to us that Heroku is not Salesforce. Heroku is actually a separate platform, which is a platform as a service. And basically, it supports multiple languages. So I know that you mentioned, Mark, you can use Heroku and not even use Salesforce at all, right? And that's because Heroku supports languages like Ruby, Java, PHP, and other databases. So it doesn't have to be in Salesforce. But for us that we are living and working in Salesforce, it allows us to connect if we want to have a front-facing website and some of the data is being shared from our Salesforce org. And it can go either direction, right? Either from the web you want to share into Salesforce, or from Salesforce you want to display on that web app. Then you would use something like Heroku. There is a resource I have listed for us that walks you through what is Heroku. There's also a Dreamforce platform developers page, and I'll add that to our resource list, that has multiple recordings of different topics of the platform. So I have never personally used Heroku, but I know that others have, and we may actually have a guest speaker come in to discuss a little bit more about Heroku and how it works, how does it interface with Salesforce. So that may be for there. Let's look at Heroku platform use cases. So again, I mentioned when you're looking at working with public-facing websites and API services, interface can be developed using open source languages. So again, we mentioned Ruby, Java, PHP, and there's more. When you're working with large data volumes, that could cause potential problems when we are trying to be mindful about our governance limits. This is another case where you would want to use Heroku. Various database platforms can be connected. Heroku can be what you think of like a middleman. It's a middleware for passing data between multiple services. And it can also be used as a development lab to test out new ideas. So let's take a minute to check in and see how we are doing. What questions do we have? Or do you have a scenario of when you had to use code, or if you've used Heroku in the past, how do we do that, and what was the use case for that? Let me check the chat box.
I think there's still some questions around what is transactional logic. Oh, never mind. I see Mark just answered.
My screen, for some reason, in the chat box, when I don't have it loaded, I have to scroll down to see any questions. So let me catch up here. So if you have a transaction that has multiple things required, something that triggers something on multiple objects.
So a common scenario jumping in here is, like, for example, if you have an order processing system on top of your Salesforce. And so what happens is, someone goes through and they buy something from you, and there might be a sales order that has what they bought as a whole, and then there's a line item and it's a record for each of them, and then there might be another related record for the transaction for the payment and stuff like that. And so what you'll find happens with the pieces is it needs to either be all or nothing, right? So someone goes onto your site and they buy something from your store, you don't want it to be where it's created that one main parent record and 3 children records and 2 sibling records, but not one of the children records, right? You want it to fail completely. And so that's transactional logic. That is, everything gets kind of bundled together in one block of stuff that either is successful or not. And things like visual flow doesn't do that. Like, you create a parent object first, and then you have to reference that parent object when you create all the children, but it doesn't have something where if it fails to create one of the children, it goes back and removes all the other stuff, unless you make it do that. And then you're actually having to build that logic in, whereas transactions up under Apex, when you build that transactional logic in there, it's actually a portion of it that you don't have to actually go back and think about it. You have built it in a little bit more with that code that says these things all have to happen or they don't work.
So, Mark, can I ask you a question just to make sure that I understand this correctly? So it's with Apex, you're almost like putting it into your memory, like your RAM. And with visual flow, you create each record at a time. You don't just like store stuff in your memory and then create it all at once at the end.
With Apex, you create records only when you do the database insert. But if there's multiple related records and multiple like lists or collections, you might have multiple database inserts. But you can make them a transaction where it says, okay, in this one transaction, I'm going to write this, 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 and this. And yes, up until that point, like everything that happens in Apex lives in memory. It's not really in Salesforce until you do that database commit. But Flow doesn't let you pick when you commit to the database. When you create the object, like when you create the record, it creates the record, right? So if you say create this record and give it this, this, and this, it creates the record. It has a variable that it stores in because it runs on Apex and it's built on Apex itself. So there's a variable that it creates and it populates that variable and it works on it. But when you're done with creating that record, it creates the record. And then it has to do that before it creates the children records. Whereas Apex, you get that control over when it actually creates the records. So
that's good to know.
Yep. And that's one of the reasons why you can utilize before triggers to do a lot of stuff. So for example, that scenario I just mentioned would be a before trigger, right? Before you write to the database for this, you want to make sure all these others happen and succeed. So that's a scenario that you would probably use code, if that helps kind of clarify things at all.
That was an excellent explanation. Thank you.
And did anyone have any additional questions from either one of the readings or the trailhead or something that you were working on that you wanted to see if we can help clarify or shine a little bit of light on tonight? I know there was a lot going on Slack. Is there anything that remains pending that you're trying to solve?
Can you go back on maybe the beginning screen, the objective screen, so maybe it jogs people's memory, especially mine?
Yeah, you guys should be able to see that now.
I mean, I'm still struggling with the Heroku trails. I think I'm on one of just the intro badges, and I can't seem to get my my environment connected to the Heroku because I can't figure out how to get it to come up in my command line. Like I downloaded the tools, and I can't figure out how to get the command line stuff to come up.
Were you
quit.
were you the one that was on a Mac too?
No, I'm on a PC.
Okay.
Okay,
So
I'm glad I'm not the only one. Olivia was having the same problems with the.
Yeah, so this brings up a good thing, and actually I forgot to mention this early on. So I realized that we bump into a lot of technical questions, and like Heroku, that's an area that's foreign to me. I don't have any experience with Heroku. So I've actually been working to recruit someone who can kind of be like our point person, like expert, to ask these questions. And so there's been discussions going on. I'm waiting for someone to get back to me, but I'm hoping that if it works out, they will be able to participate on our calls when time allows for them with their schedule, but also be added to our Slack channel so that when we have these questions and there hasn't been a study buddy who has been able to pass that point and achieve it and share, well, this is how I achieved it, that we can also utilize this person who's an expert and has experience with these things. So I'm crossing my fingers that this comes through. It seems this person is wanting to help out, so it's just a matter of scheduling and just making sure that the commitment level is okay. So as soon as I get word, I will be sure to share with you all how that works.
Yeah, I had trouble with the connector too, but I think my biggest thing is trying to understand, like visually, what it looks like, you know. So, but I don't know, maybe somebody else can share, but to me, when doing all the readings, to me it looks like, okay, so for example, PayPal, you have that front end with the with all the fields and things like that, and just say PayPal links up to Salesforce. Is that how it works? Does anybody think that's what it, I'm just trying to figure out what kind of apps do people build off of Heroku? I understand like the open source stuff, but is that similar to that where they build a front end app to pull the data from Salesforce?
Sorry, there was sport video. So that was one of the things that I shared, is that if you're ever needing to get some additional reinforcement, or you can't be at a computer and listening to things, reading things through, sometimes listening helps out. And so I actually had found, when I'm trying to find it, a page that was housing, maybe it was an older one. I don't think it's this one. This is the new one. I shared it out on Twitter. Let's see.
So just to kind of try to answer your question a little bit about like what kind of apps do people build on Heroku, there's probably one that all of us have used and really, really like. It's called Trailhead, and that is built on the Heroku platform. So it's used as a platform more for when Salesforce can't do exactly what you want it to do, that you want to go to a specific development language to write your own code, to write your own application, outside of the constraints that Salesforce obviously puts around it.
That's a great example, Mark. I didn't even think, yeah, Trailhead.
Well, that was actually Andy sharing, but.
Oh, Andy, thanks.
But yeah, so Heroku, it's really just a web application platform, and the idea is that if you work in Ruby or Rails or PHP or one of these other languages that would normally run on a web application server, and you have developers who can work with it, and they can build apps and content and do things that you can't with Salesforce out of the box on Lightning, but you want to connect it. You don't have to go through a lot of the extra work to get your Salesforce and your web application connected. They have a secure method to be like, okay, I'm going to connect this to Salesforce and I'm going to use the local database. And that's where it gets in, and it makes it a lot easier for someone to be like, not have to understand Salesforce to work with the database, but just have someone who's a programmer who can work with it. And they can do all sorts of things they wouldn't be able to do directly from their from Salesforce with like Visualforce or even Lightning components.
And I finally found that link. So one of my to-dos that I was working on was to try to find more videos for us, just to kind of listen in the background if you're driving or you're cooking, to reinforce what we've been learning. And so I put it in the chat box. It's an archive of the Dreamforce sessions. And what I did was I came to the page and I said, I just want to look for developer. And there was a very short video here. No, it wasn't Max. Or was it?
Folks, hello, hello, hello. Hi, everyone.
So it's going to be hard to hear.
I want.
So that one is not actually it. And I don't know if you guys could even hear that. It was really low on my end here. But if you want to check out the site, that's two. And there's another one with a woman. And then here's one that talks a little bit about governor limits and Heroku. So this link I put in the chat area if you want to save that and look at it later. There's other topics besides just Heroku in this as well. And as soon as I comb through them, if there's ones that are very specific, hitting on the nails of objectives for PD1, I'll be sure to add them to the resources sheet in our Google Docs and get it in Slack so that we don't have to spend an abundance of time, all of us as a whole, trying to find which ones are good. Does anyone else know of any resources that may be helpful besides Trailhead and the developer documentation for Heroku?
I think if that's what it is, because like Mark says, it's I think they touch on it, but it's not something that they expect you to build, right? So for me, just to learn from this level, just to understand what it does and what it can do. So it looks like it's a front end, like a web page with fields that actually can be, connected to Salesforce. So maybe like even, I guess even an Amazon can be built on Heroku, right? So it just connects to Salesforce. And if that's what it is, then it just makes better sense in my head to visualize it.
Mm-hmm.
If it helps at all, Amazon Web Services is a competitor to Heroku. It's
Oh yeah, well I know that, but I'm using it as
just in general.
From what I've read, it sounds like you can build something like that on Heroku.
And I'll check in because I know that they've been super, super busy, Gemma and Charlie, but I know that at one point, I think Charlie was going to try to talk about Heroku. So I will check in with her again and see if that's still a possibility so we can see something in action.
That would be cool.
Okay, so let me see. So our schedule changed just slightly. Next week will be our week 2 of content. We'll be focusing on data, modeling, and management. And then this schedule will be in here in the Google Drives for you all. There's 1 week we're going to skip, and that will be the week of Forcelandia, because there's going to be a number of us that are, I'm not going to be able to go, but I know that we have multiple study group members that are not going to be here, and that's a big event. So we're going to skip that week. So we jump from August 2nd to then August 16th. And then here I wanted to go over a few of the resources that I talked about, because I know that there's a lot of us, there's actually over 100 of us in the study group, and we're all on different levels. And some of us are moving through faster than others, and some of us are hitting these roadblocks, and we're really trying to figure out how to work our way through. So I wanted to be really mindful with this resource list, to kind of really zone in on what may be able to help us for this. So Women Code Heroes, I mentioned before, is a website. It's a blog that was actually created by Rad Women Code founder Karen Jameson. And so she has a series of blog posts that talk about all different topics about coding in Salesforce and Apex. And this is the website here. If you go to Learn to Code, you'll see that there's kind of a breakdown by basics, building blocks. Do you need to spend a whole lot of time in this resource? No, because it may be a little bit too much than what's going to be on the PD one, but may there be something that may be helpful to help break down some of what we had questions about. For instance, I know we had questions about S objects. And here, if I click on this, if for those of you who haven't already seen this resource, she does a really great job of breaking down these tech types of concepts into non-tech related, right? So she uses a lot of cooking analogies, and she kind of walks us through here. Well, what is a Salesforce, record Apex S object, and how it relates. So this is one resource that if you haven't already looked at it, you should spend some time. David Liu has, I think, 3 or 4 courses on Pluralsight that are part of his Apex Academy. And so this link here actually goes to his site. Let me open it up. And I think some of you have shared this already, but he does a really great job too of, here's beginner tutorials. So if anyone needs to learn a little bit about where to begin with Apex Visual Force, this is really good. Part of Apex Academy, he has these courses on Pluralsight, and that link is live to Pluralsight. Don Robbins has guest speakers come in, and one of them is David Liu and Dan Appleman as well. So if you want to venture off a little bit, sometimes these courses will go on sale, like they'll run like a week free long course. Check and see before you buy into anything to see what you can view for free. This video I just found the other day, Intro to Heroku. I want to say it was a little bit long, but definitely worth watching. I was doing it as I was trying to feed the baby. So this is how you can just listen to things and kind of pick up if you're busy and trying to figure out how to make time for everything. There's also the video that I shared earlier in this, the intro to AppExchange. When should I use Apex is a post by Salesforce that kind of discusses the use case scenarios of why you may have to code. And then this was the S objects link that I just showed you. And if anyone else finds resources like this, please do share it in our Google Docs. And yes, Mark says that the Pluralsight is always giving out trials. Yeah, and some of them you must look at for the CTA if anyone's working their way up there. Okay, now if you haven't been in our Google Docs, please take a look at, most importantly, these two documents. This is our weekly content schedule, and it actually breaks down what our objectives are for the week. And what I've been trying to do is 1 week ahead of time, putting in any additional resources that might be helpful. Mind you, this is not intended to be homework. You do not have to read and watch every single one of these. Brooke has so kindly combed through the Trailhead system to look for which badges relate to what we're learning. So here you'll find trailheads that will be helpful. And you can look here for week 2. I've already given us a little bit of homework and included a video that you can watch and listen to, and some more resources for week 2. The other document that I want everyone to be mindful of, and really because there's so many of us and there's so much content to cover and there's no possible way we can do it just one time a week for 2 hours, this Google Sheet is capturing, if you're new to the group because you entered a little late and you haven't seen this yet, I just want to spend a few minutes to explain what we're trying to achieve here. So flashcard tab, this tab here, is where you actually type in a question and then you give an answer. And you just put your name in there and what resource link you found this content on. And these will be the equivalent as if we physically had flashcards and we're quizzing one another. Okay, so that's what the flashcard tabs is for. Other study resources, this is where we're just going to combine all of the resources that we found helpful. And actually, I need to go through and make sure that I add in the ones that are in the slide deck because I haven't done that in the past. I'm sorry. But basically, if you find a resource and you thought it was helpful, then go ahead and share with us the name of it, what's the link, what topics did it cover, and then why did you think it was good? Subgroups. I know we don't have any just yet. This was just my sample here, but we are a really big group, and it does help if we have, 1 or 2 other people that we talk to on a frequent basis to help kind of motivate each other, and we can brainstorm and ask questions to one another before we reach out to the bigger group. Go ahead and sign up for subgroups so that we can continue to help each other out in between our weekly sessions. The mock exam questions, basically here's where we put on our hats as if we were the people who were writing these certification exams. And Mark, if you could think of any other scenarios, I know it's not going to be word for word to what you encountered, but if you could think of anything else, drop a sample in here. And anyone else who, if you are taking a beta 2 or if you've already taken the PD1 exam and you want to kind of help us see what the questions are like, feel free to put in the question. Let us know how many correct answers we should look for. Give us what are all the possible answers, and then tell us what's the correct answer and why, here in column E, why the other ones were not correct. And if you do happen to have a reference link, go ahead and share it with us, because this will give us an opportunity to, sometimes I know when I'm trying to learn too much, I get caught up in my own head and sometimes a little stubborn. Sometimes I think I know something for sure, and then it turns out I didn't know that topic so well, and I probably should have played devil's advocate. So here we just get to have other questions come at us, and we can try to test ourselves. Again, if you haven't shared your Twitter handle, go ahead and throw it in there. Mark is tracking a list of us in Twitter. And then last but not least, I want to share this tab. Kelly, you've been amazing. Thank you for offering to present, and I will touch base with you on this tomorrow. I did mention that I am talking to someone to see if we can get someone as an expert on. And one of the options that I threw out there was for this person to maybe present one or two more higher level topic areas for the PD1 exam. So once I know if that's going to pan out and which areas the volunteer would like to cover, then I can better manage how many other volunteers we need to help present. Do you need to present for the entire duration of our weekly session? No. Can you just do certain objectives? Most definitely. Because this is a large group, we can't have everybody talking at the same time, but I really do want to give everyone an opportunity to share what they've learned, share what they've used as it applies to the exam so that we can learn together. Does anyone not have access to the Google Drive? If you don't, can you either type it in the chat box or send me an email so I can make sure that you have access to this? So what is our homework? Homework that we have is the reading assignment for week 2, which included in our weekly content schedule along with the video. Make sure that you're looking at the resource Google Sheet. Even if you're not adding anything in there, start combing through those mock questions. Start combing through those flashcards, because the more we're revisiting content and we're quizzing ourselves, we keep testing and pushing the limit of what we know and what areas we still need to reinforce. So make sure that you're looking in that area. And when you're sharing your experience on social media, make sure to plug the LBA journey to PD1. And does anyone have any questions they want me to find resources for next week? If you've already started looking at the content for next week, or does anyone have any other questions they want us to try to help out with tonight before we wrap up? And it looks like Yvonne shared another link here for Apex. And we'll make sure to add that. Any questions, guys, ladies and gentlemen? Okay, either I put you guys to sleep or we are a little bit on information overload right now. That's okay. If you think of a question later, feel free to type it in the Slack workspace. If you are feeling a little bashful and you're not sure you want to put it out there, feel free to shoot me an email. And if you're interested in presenting for any of the objectives on any of the weeks that we have upcoming, please let me know. And I guess we will wrap for today. Thank you, everybody.